Okay, I think we're ready to go. Good morning to everybody that's joining us today for our weekly webinar with Kathy. Kathy's here. I'm Julie. I've been here hosting webinars with you a couple of times when Kathy's been away or when Kathy needs somebody on the other end of the desk, and that's what's happening today. I get to interview Kathy, and Kathy's going to talk to us about the very important topic of postpartum depression, diagnosing it and curing it without the use of pharmaceutical drugs. Good morning, Kathy. How are you today?
Good morning, Julie. And thank you for joining us today. Yeah, Julie's one of our valuable, dedicated volunteer team here at IMCO. Yeah,
and I do very much enjoy helping Kathy out with IMCO, and Kathy was just telling me that we're actually down as social media person, so if anybody out there's got some skills, get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
Okay, so it's said that 1 in 4 mothers experience postnatal depression, but those are just the diagnosed numbers. When working in the trenches of maternity healthcare, it can seem more like 1 in 3. But whatever the reality, postnatal depression is rampant and mostly preventable, and nearly always curable without the use of pharmaceutical drugs. There are many other cures available. Kathy, I think that we can dive straight in and talk about postnatal depression.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen because I've got a PowerPoint here. So I'll just do that. Okay, can you see that all okay?
I can.
Awesome. Okay. All righty. So I've got a bit that I'm going to get through, and for those of you who are live or later watching this, because we get a lot of people watching these later down the track, don't hesitate to screenshot any of the pages. You're most welcome to, because there's quite a bit of information on them. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is that diagnosing, curing, and preventing postnatal depression. Certainly, I should just go back to that. Certainly, they say it's clinically sort of 1 in 4, but yeah, in the trenches, it's not. It's definitely more like 1 in 3. 1 in 4 is that which gets recorded along the way, and it's definitely more prevalent than that. And it's such a debilitating thing to have going on during a time in your life that should be, in theory, one of the most happiest, most joyous times of your life. And the fact that even that on itself can make the depression feel more depressing. That you've got this little little bird on your shoulder going, but you should be happy. Well, I'm not very happy.
This is one of life's most joyous occasions.
Yes, and so it kind of almost makes it worse in a way. Not kind of, it does, I think. All right, so we'll head into it. So what I want to just overview first is understanding and sort of what postnatal depression is and where it sort of slots in. So I'm just going to run through these a little bit quickly, but firstly, there's something called the baby blues. That's not depression, that's physiological. It's a normal and common reaction. It usually starts at around about day 2 to 3 after having a baby. And it's really, its dominant cause is the fact that your hormone levels the woman's hormone levels have changed by more than 1,000%. From when she was pregnant to when she's now not pregnant, and that huge drop in hormones creates a tidal wave that hits you as these baby blues. Women who basically they're at day 2 or day 3 after having a baby, and they're just feeling really teary-eyed and emotional, and they don't know what's going on. Quite often they'll say things like, oh, I'm just not coping. Yeah, no, it's fine. It's baby blues. And oftentimes midwives we'll look at it and go, yes, that means the milk's coming in. It's a sign that the body's doing everything that it should normally do.
Hormones are working.
Things are working. Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Yeah, things are working. Things are physiologically processing as they should. About 1 in 5 women does not get any kind of baby blues. It's a little unusual, but yeah, most do. So, pretty much 4 out of 5. So, and it's a really important thing, I think, for the partner to realize as well, to just know it's going to hit, because they've already often been through 2 or 3 nights of latent labor with their partner, then the actual active labor, and then the arrival of the birth, and then the adjustments of breastfeeding, and they're sleep deprived, and now 2 or 3 days into this joyous moment of them becoming parents, she can't stop crying and he just wants to fix it. Yeah, and he can't fix it because it's hormonal. And so the best thing he can do is just say, oh really, oh tell me more.
Or what can I do?
What can I do? Yes, that's great. Yeah. Okay, occasionally, quite rarely, we get something called the baby pinks, and this is when a woman is just way too on top of the world. Like, I mean, it's sort of like bizarrely happy, and things like she's day 2 and she's out doing a full supermarket shop and ecstatic over it all, and like it's just, she is just way too capable and peachy, and it's just bizarre behavior, and that is not a little, that's quite a big red flag of potential postnatal psychosis down the track.
Right.
So if a woman is just acting bizarrely capable of everything, and also usually hardly having any sleep, yeah, and she can just get fixated with the baby, and it's just all it's she's not being herself at all. It's all really weird behavior. Okay, then we've got PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. This is not uncommon, but it's certainly never normal. And the thing with PTSD is this is a woman who typically has gone through some kind of dramatic or traumatic or both delivery at her birth, at her baby's birth, and she's just traumatized from the whole thing. There were things said, typically there were things said to her during the event of that baby's delivery. It's typically a delivery. It's typically not that she's given birth. It's usually that
something's happened to her.
Yeah, something's happened. So it's an instrumental delivery of von two forceps, or it's an emergency C-section. Even the word emergency with C-section can kind of cause that PTSD. Emergency in medical terms just simply means that it was not a scheduled surgery. And it doesn't mean bells and whistles. There's something else that we have in obstetrics, which is a crash section, and that's a whole, it is a actual full-blown emergency, and they are very rare, to be honest. Well, they should be.
We hope so.
Yeah. What I say is when you've got a system that very well supports natural labor leading on to normal birth, and they're not putting epidurals on every single woman that walks in the door. So when you've got a system that is supporting the natural, then things leading to a crash section are rare. But crash sections, as I say, I mean, they are not something that occurs that often. But with the woman with the PTSD, it'll be things like she'll be told, your baby's in distress, we need to deliver your baby. Now we might know as a clinician looking at the CTG trace that the baby was in some mild distress, and between contractions it's fine, and its baseline is okay. It might be rising a little bit, but actually the variability is still good on that heart rate. But every time there's a contraction, we are seeing a late deceleration, and that's showing us that their baby's getting a little bit tired, and it really can't go on for another hour or so, and we need to expedite the delivery. So that's typically what it is. And but to say that the baby's in distress, well, there's a whole different little levels of distress, but that woman can be left with scar tissue of thinking that her baby was just about to die before she got delivered, and that these obstetricians saved the day, and she's left with that for the rest of her life. And that's actually, when you look in the clinical records, no, that's not what happened at all. There was so much intervention got into that labor. It was an induction at the beginning, and then there was an epidural, and then there was an oxytocin drip, and you got all these things that just commonly lead up to fetal distress. And it's when we look at it and go, yeah, that baby's not very happy. It's been in labor for so long. It's starting to get really tired. So the PTSD is in my career, I've had a lot of women come to me for the first time with their second baby, and they've come from a PTSD kind of perspective, that they're like, I am not going through that again. I am not putting a baby through that again. I need to get engaged way more than I did when I was the first time I was pregnant. I want to learn more. I want to understand more. I want to get empowered. I'm not going to be grabbing for the epidural the first second I get a bit of pain, and she just really takes control. And often I've seen when we support those women effectively enough, the PTSD can be healed by birth.
Empowerment.
Yeah, totally empowerment, to take it back. And so PTSD can certainly be a contributor to someone having depression, postnatal depression, but PTSD itself has four really particular specific characteristic symptoms to it. And one is, we've got it listed there on the slide, but one is intrusion, that the memories of that trauma recur sort of in the middle of doing something else. You could be in the middle of washing dishes, and you just kind of get that feeling of put your legs being put up in stirrups for this emergency fondue delivery or something. You get these intrusion thoughts. Avoidance. So these are the people that will avoid situations that trigger those feelings again. And I remember one girlfriend with PTSD before I was a midwife, and but even then I recognized what it was, even though I knew nothing clinically about anything. And she would never drive down the street where the hospital was. So she would take a long route to avoid that street, to avoid those feelings. Hyperarousal. So the person may become suddenly irritable, or sort of explosive, even when not provoked. And self-medication. So to get rid of those flashbacks, or the loneliness, or the panic attacks that can go on, they sometimes will turn to alcohol and drugs. They just need to numb things a bit. And yeah, so those are sort of the common things that tell you that maybe you've actually got a bit of PTSD, or maybe your client has got a bit of PTSD going on. And the thing that frustrates me the most is that PTSD is, most times, I would say 98% of the time, it was preventable. That woman did not need to be left with that. It's even when you have a genuine, rare crash section type, huge emergency, you can debrief with that woman, and you can sit down with her afterwards, and you can go through it all, so she's not left with PTSD.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't, it just frustrates the heck out. And so often I've had women where they've got this in their history, and I'm like, well, let's look up your records. I'll order a copy of her records. We'll go through the clinical notes, and I debrief with you. It could be 4 years later, 3 years later, I'm debriefing with you. And she goes, oh my God, I had no idea that, yes, that's what happened. That's why it happened. And it wasn't actually that big a bells and whistle emergency at all.
Yeah. And often it's just that reframing that really helps people to see that and to be able to get on with their life again, to not have to drive around the block to avoid the hospital.
Get on with not being hyper worried about their baby's long-term consequences of the fact that it had the instrumental delivery or surgical delivery. Yeah. All right, then we've got the really quite rare and really quite serious postnatal psychosis. So postnatal psychosis happens, they sort of estimate about 1 in 1,000 women. That statistic does vary, but it is rare. And this is when the woman has utterly and completely lost the plot. I mean, she is crazy, and crazy people don't know they're crazy. So that's people with depression typically know that they're feeling depressed. People with psychosis have no idea.
It's the people around them that can recognize that they're in trouble.
And it can happen quite quickly. So there's sort of like a golden rule with postnatal psychosis that for every day it goes undiagnosed, it's another month to the recovery.
Wow.
So if it takes, like this is a woman that, again, you said she probably would have started off the postnatal pinks. And then it's just gone crazy. So like by day 2 or 3, she's just like way too happy and coping way too well. By day 7, she's hardly slept, and she's just doing the most bizarre behavior. And typically by sort of day 14, she's speaking to God, and her new baby son is the Messiah, and she's dealing with aliens, and like really super crazy. And so usually and it's the people around her that will pick up and go, oh my God, she's so not okay. And these women need hospitalization. They are absolutely not capable of looking after their baby safely or unsupervised. And they probably need lithium, some pretty strong drugs and 50% of the time, the women have no risk factors. There's no mental health issues for them personally or in their family history. And it is incredibly, incredibly bad luck. The father is left.
To pick up.
Yeah, the partner or father's left sort of holding the reins. So, if it takes 12 days to diagnose you, it's going to take her 12 months to recover.
Gosh.
It's a very, very cruel thing, cruel disease. No one deserves it. And anybody, and it's a very, I don't know, it has so much connotations around it, and people know so little around it, they kind of guess it. And these are typically the women who have, gone on to kill their children and things like that, because they are absolutely psychotic. They are absolutely mad. And they need, so it's really rare, as I say. This is I know that's a really small font, but this is actually the pretty much it's got a dot point, but it almost could be a number point, because it's really kind of giving you the process of what happens over those days from the very beginning at the right through. So
so this is a sequence.
Yes, thank you.
An emergence of symptoms.
I lost that word there. Yeah, that's a sequence.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're into
Great.
postnatal depression, or postpartum depression. Is very common, but again, never normal. There's a number of symptoms, but the degree of the symptoms varies a lot in individuals. And you'll see I've got 3 pages there of potential symptoms. And that's
Gosh.
because I know there's just so many, and everybody experiences it so differently. And I would encourage those watching this live to just read through those 3 pages, and because you can get it from this extreme to that extreme, or this extreme to that extreme. And yeah, like for example, if the woman is naturally a tidy, clean freak, she can be the woman that gets uncharacteristically sloppy, and disinterested in her housework. Or it can be the other way around. It can be the woman who is always pretty laid back and had quite a relaxed household, becoming a neat freak. So that's why I say the symptoms are, nobody will have all of them, but usually, they'll have half a dozen or more of these various different potential symptoms. So I can't recommend enough that just actually having a little read through them all, so that they're sitting in the back of, especially for us as clinicians, that they're sitting in the back of our mind. There is something called the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Questionnaire. That's a really good one.
Great tool.
And yeah, it's a pretty simple, I'll just go back on that. It's a pretty simple questionnaire where the women are just answering stuff basically in the last 7 days. Have you failed, or blah blah blah. It's very simple, and it's incredibly accurate on its results. So it will say, look, the person's fine, the person's a bit borderline, or the person has definitely got depression. So certainly there are some practices, some GP, MD practices around the world, that the first time that they see their client in the postpartum period, it's like typically when they're doing the first vaccines of the baby. And a really good habit that they get into is that while the woman is sitting around waiting, with her vaccinated baby to see if there's any reactions to them, while she's sitting there doing that, is to get her to complete that questionnaire. But that can be at around sort of 6 weeks, but it can be good to have it done before that as well, and potentially afterwards, and just discussing with women the fact that it is so common, and even giving them the link and saying, look, if they can do the questionnaire themselves. It's kind of not rocket science type thing. They can go online, fill it out, and it will give them their own result. And people with depression have got enough control that they can work out that they're depressed. They know they're not themselves. It's not a psychosis situation where a clinician needs to get in and get involved to diagnose them. You can diagnose that yourself. It's just giving them the tools that they can do that. And I think that as all birth practitioners, when we're dealing with women in the antenatal and the intrapartum, the childbirth part, we should be making sure that we're discussing that and that we're empowering them, so that, because quite often around the world there's very little postpartum clinical care. Does everyone get home visits from a midwife? No.
Nope.
So empowering them to just be able to look up the link, check in on themselves, make sure they're feeling good.
Yeah. It's a really wonderful habit for people to be in to be able to check back with themselves, and to be able to check in with themselves and say, I'm not feeling myself at the moment. And then to be able to enact a bit of a rescue plan, which I'm sure that you've got some great ideas for that coming up.
And here we go.
So
I've got what I want to talk about is some of what I have found to be some of the really great naturopathic supplements that women can be taking. And often that's kind of all they need to get them over the hump. Excuse me. There are times when, you know, pharmaceutical antidepressants are appropriate, but I just don't believe they should be the first cab off the rank. And because they have their own consequences, which we'll go through. But okay, so obviously there's counselling, psychotherapy, hypnotherapy, but I would have to say, as far as the counselling and psychotherapy goes, from a general postnatal depression perspective, I'm a bit meh on its success rate. I certainly have met women who have said that it was just what they needed, and it really helped them through. And I suspect those women had a bit more PTSD than depression. And what they needed was to get that trauma and that conversation out of their system.
So
I can't back that with my own
debriefing.
They needed to debrief.
It's very important. Yeah.
Yeah. But depression itself is such a cyclic thing that because you're not sleeping solidly through the night, because you have to breastfeed a baby through the night, so because you're not sleeping solidly, you know, the next day you're producing more adrenaline in your system, and that impacts your melatonin at night, and then you kind of get to this point, and you kind of get in the cyclic thing that you're so tired that you can't sleep properly, and because you can't sleep properly, it makes you so tired, and you're so tired, so wound up, you can't sleep properly, and it just becomes a cycle. And if we can interject into that cycle, and improve the levels of serotonin in her system, then hey presto, we're curing the depression. Oftentimes we're fine. Go to cola is it's nicknamed food for the brain. Please, Julie, feel free to add in any of your comments too, because this is very much her area of specialty. But yeah, Gotu kola is nicknamed food of the brain. It's one of Ayurvedic medicine's primary rejuvenative herbs, also called Brahmi sometimes, because it brings knowledge of the brain at the highest reality. So I thought that one would be probably less about someone that has depression and more about somebody that's feeling like they're not depressed, but they've just got foggy brain, baby brain kind of feeling. Yeah.
We all know that one.
Yeah. And baby brain is a real thing. They have actually realized that a woman's brain shrinks from late pregnancy through to around about the baby being sort of 8 to 9 months old. And for me personally, I had it every time, and I would lose nouns. I just name anything. I'd go, can you get that thing over there? Like, I just lost nouns. And I would sound really ridiculous in sentences sometimes. I distinctly remember, in fact, a family dinner where I don't know, our third must have been like about a month or 2 months old or something, and I kind of said a sentence where every second word I couldn't find the word in my brain that I wanted to say, but I sort of made this sentence, and I could feel everybody else in the room kind of looking at each other going, you know, like I just shut up for the rest of the night. I was like, I can't even talk now. The baby brain is so dominant. Anyway,
you needed someone to tuck you into bed.
So St. John's wort. This has been used for hundreds of years in Europe to chase away the melancholia, which is the and anxiety. Do know that it's contraindicated with the contraception pill.
Yes,
So
it is.
yeah, so if a woman's on the pill, she shouldn't be on St. John's wort, because it basically makes the pill less effective. It's a mood enhancing natural antidepressant, which increasingly makes available serotonin and dopamine. In some Western countries, it is more popularly prescribed than pharmaceutical antidepressants. Its effectiveness takes about 6 weeks to become fully apparent, which is also similar to pharmaceutical antidepressants. So this is one that slowly improves things and also should be sort of slowly dialed down. What's your thoughts on St. John's wort?
I think it's actually a very effective herb for this kind of thing. It's compatible with breastfeeding, which is very important. It does take time to kick in, but you can actually combine it with other herbs to get a good effect earlier. So it's something that needs to be run by a herbalist. If you need to use these herbs, go and see a herbalist, and they'll be able to make you an individualized mix that will help to address.
I can't agree with you enough on that. And so often I'm saying to women all the time, practically every day, please go and invest in engaging with a qualified naturopathic medical herbalist, and see that wellness physician, so that they can create a customized regime. It just makes such a difference.
It does.
Ginkgo biloba, that's its oldest tree, its oldest species of tree. Ginkgo biloba extract is a mood enhancement supplement, very effective for treating depression and mental concentration, with almost immediate effects. And I've just also recently learned that it's very good for glaucoma as well. So that's interesting. Didn't know that one. My husband has glaucoma, which it's quite hereditary. That's where your eyeball pressure is sort of abnormally high. His is freaky, abnormally badly high, and he's had stent surgery and other things going on. And it was great through that process to hear from this ophthalmologist specialist god recommending ginkgo biloba. So you're like, hey, and that's because that's what we're all about, aren't we? IMCO, it's integrative medicine, take our modern, the modern medicine, westernized,
the best of both.
Put it both, and it was so good to hear that. Siberian ginseng is not a true panic ginseng. It is a mood enhancement supplement that gives marvelous protection against stress, combating depression, insomnia, moodiness, fatigue. It helps to balance neurotransmitters, increases focus and endurance. Now, I would have to say that has become my favorite supplement for women to take, particularly those women. So if a woman has a history of depression, and you see that's freaking common as well. When you ask a woman at a first appointment, is there any, have you ever had a history of depression, ever been on antidepressants? Jeepers, that's like about a 1 in 4 have before they've even had babies. And it feels like GPs or MDs are just handing out SSRIs like candy, which I think they are. And so when you've got women who've got a history or a strong family history of it, quite often I will say to them, look, get yourself 3 months supply of Siberian ginseng, and take the first month and the last month of pregnancy, and then you've got 2 months and the next 2 months after giving birth or thereabouts. And I've found it very effective in, women, even with women who have this is their second baby again, and it was horrific last time, and they got depressed, and everything went to custard, and they've come away going, oh my God, I had nothing like that this time. I felt normal. I felt good. And then the other one on that list is 5-HTP, which is 5-hydroxytryptophan. Now, 5-HTP is the precursor or the intermediate metabolite, essential amino acid that the body converts to 5-HT, which is serotonin. And it works very well at regulating mood to combat mild to moderate depression, great for easing sleep deprivation too. And when I was myself in university, and I had 3 young kids, and I'm doing university full time, and I'm on call as a midwife, and all of these, it was pretty full on. And when I'd get to that 1 month at the end of each semester where it's just massive, there's exams, there's assignments due, and I just knew I was not going to be getting the sleep that I really should have. I'm going to be sleep deprived for a month. I just knew that would be happening. So I would always get myself a 30 capsule of it, and I would take one every night, and it would just keep me on, it's good for it. It seems to be so helpful when you're sleep deprived. And let's face it, all women postnatally are sleep deprived. But where I've found 5-HTP to be particularly great is with the partners, because sometimes you got partners who are so stressed, like they just and quite often it might be because opposites attract oftentimes in couples, and quite often I've seen it where she is quite a laid-back personality, and she's actually doing fine, but he's not a laid-back personality, so if they're going overseas, he's the one that packs the bags, and because he's a detail, cross the T, dot the I, line everything up kind of person, and they've got this squawking thing that's come home that can't even explain to them what's wrong with it, and he can start to get quite sleep deprived and anxious and stressed. And so Siberian ginseng for her and 5-HT for him, I've definitely found is quite a winning little combination. But looking over those 3, ginkgo, Siberian ginseng, and 5-HTP, Julie, what's your kind of thoughts on where they fit in within to the postnatal depression scenario?
Well, interestingly, I haven't used any of these for postnatal depression. I've got other herbs in my bag that I would reach for, but ginkgo is an interesting one because that's all about feeding the tissues, feeding the nervous system. I think that could actually be quite a useful herb there, and I'm looking forward to later on today sitting down and having a look through the literature about these substances and postnatal depression. Siberian ginseng, I would say the ginsengs I would avoid during breastfeeding generally, just because they can be a little bit stimulating. But again, I'm really looking forward to diving into the literature and having a look what's written about this, because
that's the one particularly I found, is to say, for women who have a history of depression, it seems to give them some level of protection.
Interesting. It is really important to bust out the herbs that work well, and sometimes they are herbs that have got precautionary contraindications for breastfeeding, and that is always about the fact that we don't have a good body of evidence to say that it's safe. That doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't be using it. So there's so many herbs in our arsenal that we're told not to use for breastfeeding women when actually they're very beneficial, and there's no evidence to say that they shouldn't be used. Yeah, and women need
And we
treatment.
do have that situation so much, don't we? Where women will say to us as clinicians, you know, oh, is it safe if I eat this while I'm pregnant, or is it safe if I do this when I'm breastfeeding? And we can't say it's not safe, and we can't say it's safe, and that's because you know, no, and I often will explain it to women that a university ethics committee is not going to approve a study that could cause something unsafe to an unborn baby or to a newborn. It's never going to be approved. So, and no woman will want to participate in it. Hey, would you like to take this and see if it harms your baby? No, right? So we can't prove that it's safe, and we can't prove that it's unsafe. And but it's that, So sometimes it's about sort of sitting down and logically thinking, well, you know, if and we can do that a bit with pharmacological, with pharmaceutical
Much easier.
right? Because we know what's happening with the pharmacodynamics and the pharmacokinetics of it, and you can use logic to go, well, okay, you know, if she swallows that and it goes through the liver path system, that's how much ends up in her bloodstream, so that's how much ends up in the breast milk, and so this then it goes through the baby's liver system, and then that is how much ends up in the baby's bloodstream. And you go, oh yeah, actually that's a tiny amount. That's the benefits outweigh it, but it is still a bit harder with naturopathic medicine, I guess.
And they're things that people are often told to avoid, but you know, women absolutely deserve treatment for these things, and herbs are a wonderfully gentle way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we've got the SSRIs. So these are the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are the pharmaceutical drugs. So I have included them in there. The thing that I don't think is well explained to women at all when they're handed these out is that, you know, they are told, hey, you know, it's going to take, you know, 4 to 6 weeks. You could feel some improvement in 2 weeks, but it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks to really, you know, get your optimum. But what frustrates the heck out of me is what they don't explain is the fact of how that works. And it's basically changing the structure of the cell. It's making the serotonin receptors sort of migrate deeper into the cell, so that between the synapse gap between the neurons, that serotonin sort of sits in that synapse gap longer. So there's the reuptake of it goes on for longer, so they kind of get a slightly better amount of a longer amount of exposure to serotonin. And then, but these women also, it needs to put, I know it is emphasized to them that they should not cold turkey on this drug, that you must slowly wean off it, but man, you can't emphasize that one enough. Far out, because when women, because what happens is women can get, and anybody on an SSRI, not woman, but they can get to that point where they actually feel really good, and they kind of really know it. They go, oh look, I'm fine, I don't need this anymore because I feel good again, and they'll cold turkey on themselves, and then 3 days later, oh my god, they're in a worse place than they were to start with. So and it has long-term other health consequences. One of the things I really like about the one I mentioned before, the 5-HTP, is that how that works is that it gives your body the 5-HTP, that it can convert to 5-HT if it needs it. So if your body knows that it's low on serotonin, you take a 5-HT tablet at night and your body will convert it overnight, which is when we make serotonin, is while we sleep. So it'll convert it, and you've got that serotonin there ready to use the next day if you need it, type of thing. Rather than the SSRI, which doesn't produce more serotonin, it just makes the receptors migrate deeper into the cell.
Yeah.
So it's just a longer exposure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Um,
it's really important to highlight that pregnancy is not the time to wean from SSRIs.
yes.
And
Yes.
postnatally, not the time to be weaning from these things or to changing medications.
Yes, yes, definitely. Thank you for throwing that one. It's not the time to be weaning. No. Okay. Korean or Chinese ginseng, and the name Panax ginseng translates as cure all. And it has a gentle, slow, cumulative, and broad healing effect on energy, the mind, stress, and much more. And just in brackets there, the natural white ginseng is steam processed to produce the higher potency red ginseng. And then there's the last of them here, some other favorites, supplements for women in general, false unicorn root, chaste tree berries, shatavari, evening primrose oil, and damiana. I don't know if I pronounced that one correctly. So
right.
any comments you want to add on those others?
These are all lovely female herbs. There is some concern about chaste tree potentially interfering with milk production for some women, depending on what the underlying mechanism is that's interfering there. Shatavari is great to help with supporting milk production, particularly women that are low in prolactin. Evening primrose oil is a wonderful herb to help with the regulation of all sorts of female hormones. Absolutely, I'd say evening primrose is a great one for most people to be taking. If you need any kind of hormonal support. Yeah, no, they're great. They're wonderful herbs. Again, best individualized. So if you're able to see a medical herbalist or a naturopath to have an individual prescription made, then that's absolutely ideal.
Yeah, have that customized regime.
Yeah.
So the last slide I've got is basically the preventers. And this is, as I say, this is my experience of what the top 3 preventers are from my clinical practice over years, decades of dealing with women. And number 1 top 3 preventer is having a positive childbirth experience. Women who experience a dramatic and or traumatic birth experience often end up shock and horror at a sort of real deep visceral level, from the dramatic loss of control that they just never anticipated. And that then that can often that can lead on that they've got these anxious worries around their baby's ongoing well-being. You know, when you see your baby with these great big marks on its head from the forceps, and that take days and days to get rid of, it's really hard to tell a woman, oh, you never have to worry about that again. And I remember a dear girlfriend who, when her son was about 10, he was diagnosed with dyslexia. And right then, the very first thing she said was, it was the forceps. So she, you know, a decade later, she's still convinced that traumatic delivery impacted her baby. And who's to say it wasn't the forceps? Because when you see the, you know, like we don't know, but the point is that it stays with the woman, I guess is what I'm saying. And from this is probably the biggest one, is from the anger at themselves at knowing they failed, that during their pregnancy they failed to deeply engage with and really invest in high quality, empowering education on the stages of childbirth and the phases of labor, they assumed they'd be okay. And they're so upset at themselves. They feel like they've let themselves down, but more to the point, they've let their baby down. These are women who, during the pregnancy, would say things like, oh, look, I'm just too busy to get to antenatal class tonight. I've just got too much on at work. Or they might say, oh, look, I just didn't read that book. I'm just not a big reader. Or, you know, there's like, they just didn't really engage as much as they could. They kind of did the bare minimum a little bit. And now afterwards, because of that instrumental delivery or the surgical crash section or whatever went on, they're so angry at themselves. They're just mad and disappointed and pissed at themselves that they blame themselves for the outcome because they didn't engage as much as they could have. And that's a huge, in my opinion, a huge contribution to the cause of depression. And that's where these are the women, as I mentioned earlier, who will, second time round, it's all different. They're like, this is it. I'm taking control. I am holding the reins. I am going to learn about this. I'm not letting that happen to me again. I'm not letting that happen to my baby again. And but until she gets into that next pregnancy and gets into that point and redoes things differently this time and has a different outcome that becomes empowering, all until that could occur, she has this hanging around her for potentially forever. So that's number one. Number two is having a successful breastfeeding experience. So for both the woman and the baby who have experienced a dramatic or a traumatic birth experience, this can seriously impact how smoothly breastfeeding successfully establishes, which for the mother, combined with the failed normal birth, consequently compounds mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually as a miserable, I'm failing at everything. You know, she just, all of her dreams of what her white picket fence, of what she imagined of having this lovely natural water birth that ended up in this forceps delivery, and this wonderful breastfeeding, you know, beautiful bonding dyad of the mother and baby that's just, you know, she's 4 weeks into it and she feels like she just wants to commit breastfeeding hurry because it's just got so hard. All of that combines with the sleep deprivation. It's almost like, how did she not get depressed?
Yeah.
Right? Like
Absolutely.
when you've had this traumatic birth experience and breastfeeding is sucking big time and you're completely sleep deprived, how is it not possible to get depressed is really kind of the situation that we're left with. And with avoiding the first one, that's about getting really engaged, deeply engaged with really high quality education on childbirth and just doing everything you can, reading every book, watching every video, just really getting involved with it and going, okay, I want to know this inside out and back to front. It's about that woman getting to the point where when she goes into the labor, she feels nothing but excitement and the fear has gone. Because she's like, this is going to be
Let's do this.
I'm so excited. And that's what she needs to get herself to that point. With the breastfeeding one, the cure there, apart from education, but it's a very difficult thing to learn much about until you're actually holding a baby to your breast. You know, it's all theory until you get to do that. But the best thing there is to pre-coordinate a daily visit at home to you or in the hospital, both, by a woman who has successfully breastfed several babies.
That's such a wonderful idea.
Is your godsend.
That's amazing. Yeah.
it's the best cure. And you not somebody that has, breastfed a baby for a couple of months. Nah. You want to
someone that's seen it through
2 or 3 or 4 babies for 6 to 8 months, but exclusively breastfed that baby for 6 months and then some, and done several babies, because every baby can be a little different.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not like when you've breastfed one baby, you know about how to breastfeed babies. You need several babies to get.
Even then, each baby and each mom's different.
Yeah. So, it's about going out and finding that person that can do, or persons. Because that's a lot for someone, but that's what you need. You need a daily visit every day from somebody who knows the heck what they've done. And that will make such a difference. We are not supposed to be sitting at home alone breastfeeding our baby without
absolutely not
support.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing that's just occurred in modern society. I will speak specifically about the Chinese in this. I would say of all ethnicities, Chinese are the least knowledgeable on breastfeeding, because we've got whole generations who only had one baby.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there is still to this day in China, there is no law against formula advertising that states that formula is better than breast milk. There's no law against it. So it still goes on. So with it's very unique to the Chinese, but I've just seen it time and time again where the woman's mother, the grandmother, is very concerned about feeding colostrum, relying on colostrum alone, because she just was brought up on the fact that colostrum's not adequate because they're all topped up with formula. And then, of course, when you top up with formula in those first few days during colostrum, well, hey presto, the milk doesn't come in to the same degree. So then you've got women who were left needing to rely on formula because they never really had that wonderful milk coming in as it should, or didn't stay at a great production level. So there, with any Chinese clients and women who are Chinese, who your mum had one baby in mainland China, if that's the situation, then you really want to get some really good education about understanding breastfeeding before the baby's born.
Yeah, that's a really
so
good
that you've
point.
got that mother, that the mother's mother, the grandmother, that she's on side, and that she's not freaking out and heating up formula, every time the baby, which is what otherwise see. And that was really, it's just one of the byproducts of the one child rule, really, and the no laws on regulating how formula is advertised.
And the cultural the cultural reluctance to accept colostrum as a way of feeding a baby as well. That's something that's quite widespread throughout different Asian cultures, and it's seen as a big barrier to establishing breastfeeding. So it's really important to have those conversations about colostrum and feeding before we need them.
And when you oh gosh, we're almost at time. I won't and so the third thing, the last thing, is those high risk taking prophylactic supplements. So that's basically saying the women who know that they're at risk for depression, got a history of it themselves personally, or a strong family history of it, or they're in a situation that's just not great. So it might be that they're not just dealing with a newborn, but they're also dealing with their mother-in-law dying, or their partner has lost their job, or there's just other pressures, that life is not easy for them at the moment, and there's just a lot that's going on. So for those that know that they're at high risk of potential depression, considering all women are really at high risk, but the particularly high risk ones, then that's where I say some prophylactic supplements can be a good idea. And without doubt, the best thing is for them to be seeing individually, one-on-one, a medical herbalist, to get a customized regime that's really suited for their body and their history. But if they can't get access to that, or they can't afford access to that, then I would say, well, again, that's where I have found Siberian ginseng and 5-HTP are great for those. They seem to make a difference, but certainly having a customized regime would be better. So those are just my contacts, but most people know me anyway. If you just Google Kathy Fray, you'll find me. And so so that's everything.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
So, well, thank you for co-hosting with us. I was appreciating that. Didn't want to and hopefully that's a few useful tools, especially the diagnosing and some basic supplements in there. Anything you want to add, Julie?
My favorite postnatal depression prophylactic is, I guess it's around the PTSD component and the birth trauma. There's one simple intervention that can be done after the event within the first 24 hours of a traumatic birth that has been shown to have quite an impact on the emergence of PTSD, and that's to sit down and do a puzzle. A jigsaw puzzle.
What kind of puzzle? Like a jigsaw puzzle?
Just a jigsaw puzzle, something that engages your brain and makes it work in that way.
Gosh, I wonder who got inspired to do that study. That's fascinating. I have not heard that. Wow.
Yeah, so it's used for trauma prevention for all sorts of traumatic situations, but there has been a specific study done on birth trauma. And it's just such a simple thing that you can do in a hospital room or at home or whatever. And I think that it's,
That's amazing. And within sort of how many hours again are you talking about?
Within 24 hours of the traumatic event.
And what kind of level of jigsaw puzzle, I guess? Because some jigsaw puzzles take days.
Yeah.
So what sort of thing are you thinking of?
Sit down and engage with it for a good hour or so.
Right, just an hour of engaging, of using the brain onto something else.
Yeah.
Wow, it's almost like a distraction to the brain, isn't it? And a normalizing of function.
Yeah, and it just, I guess, shocking it into moving in a different direction that's more familiar and takes you out of that that more pathological process that's going to be setting up.
Have you are you
pathways.
Aware of many hospitals that are kind of using? You could imagine, like in an ER department where people come in with trauma and then they're admitted to the ward, and they're just like left there with nothing except to stare into space and go over the trauma in their head. And I've been in that situation. So of admitted to ED and serious trauma and into the ward, and then you sit there and you just go through it over and over and over.
And you've got nothing to do but to sit there and ruminate. And
I'm very aware that I was left with PTSD from that event. So yeah, have you heard of many hospitals actually engaging in that? That's so fascinating.
Not necessarily from the maternity perspective, but it is becoming something that's being picked up in ERs or for some hospitals. I don't know how widespread it is, but I am aware that there is a few hospitals in Australia that's enacting.
That is so simple, isn't it? It's incredible. And you could people would just, if people knew, they would just donate all of these jigsaw puzzles that are sitting at home that they don't want to do again, that they've never thrown out. And
that's right.
They could be all over the wards and hospitals. It would cost the hospital nothing.
Pack one in your birth bag.
What a cool idea. What a very cool idea.
Mm.
Anything else you want to add?
No,
No?
nothing else. Nothing else at this point. I must
I love
say,
that. And
I
so
have to I do have to leave for the school run in 5
yes, we
minutes.
do. And everybody else does. So look, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Julie, for joining me today. And thank you to those that are here live. And we do hope that this was, useful, practical information. And want to wish everybody a wonderful rest of their week.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Kathy, and thank you to everybody tuning in.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye, Julie. Thank you.
Bye.